My name's Rex, and I have a lot of experiences or happenings with Bigfoot. I moved in this area when I was 5 years old, and over a period of 40 years, I'd had different experiences, and my brothers have too, and my sons. And not that we were looking for it, but we just ran into it by accident. I was probably 9 years old when I first heard about it. My first experience was when I was 14 years old. Myself and my brother Dick, we walked down the road toward the footbridge. We were going, just walking, because that's what we did here. You know, I used to camp down there all the time. And we were walking around, and we were coming up this road here at the time, and we seen something in the road we thought was a parked Volkswagen. It was quite a ways up the road from us, and we stopped and we thought, well, it's just somebody parked there with his girlfriend or something, you know. And it stood up, and when it stood up, it had to have been 8 foot tall, shoulders 4 foot wide, and just long like hair hanging from it. And that's how we named it the Grassman. That was our experience with that. And of course we ran away. We ran the opposite way, but this thing came out in front of us again. And we turned and we ran back the way we came. And it was there again. So as we were running down the road again, there's side roads that come off of this. They're cinder roads and they go through the woods. And that's where they had pumps at down here. The Firestone had pump stations through here. We ran down one of the side roads, and we were trying to avoid wherever this was, but we could hear it still in a distance in the woods coming through here. So we had turned the corner and we got to an area where the road goes straight up to where my house is. That's a good quarter mile, half mile, somewhere around there, I'm not sure. And we stopped at this tree and we both kneeled down because we were out of breath running. We'd been running for at least an hour. We both heard this deep humming noise. It was like nothing I ever heard before. And it made 3 of these long humming. But when it got done, my brother and I were both standing up. And we didn't know we stood up. And when it quit, we both fell to our knees. We looked at each other and said, no matter what, we're running all the way home. We're not stopping. And we did. We ran from that spot all the way to our house. And we ran around the driveway. My dad and a friend of his was sitting out on the front walk because they heard us yelling down there and they couldn't figure out what was going on. And we ran past them, ran around the back of the house and went in the house. My dad come and said, what's wrong? And we told him. And him and his buddy walked down the main road toward where we just came from, trying to see if they could see anything, and they never did. But that was my first experience.
If the forests of Ohio form the habitat for an unclassified North American ape, then how does it survive? This is a question with a multifaceted answer, which would presumably touch on issues of range size, shelter, and access to water sources. It would also have to address the basic biological need of calorie consumption. In other words, what might Sasquatch eat? Where might they find their food? And how much of it would they require? It may be instructive to examine other branches of the primate tree as a basis for speculation.
I'm kind of in the field where I actually agree that it's probably some descendant of something like Gigantopithecus. It may not be the exact answer, but I think that's got to be some descendant. And you know, I've been asked by people about, you know, do you think they're interdimensional and all that kind of stuff, and they don't need to be.
Do you think Sasquatch is a primate? And if so, what do you think about using, or I guess even if you don't, what do you think about people using primates as a goalpost for monitoring Bigfoot activity?
Yes, I think Bigfoot is a primate, but exactly what he is, I don't know, other than he does, qualify as being a primate. But my question, I'm going to answer your question with a question, just exactly what are we looking at? Is this some sort of an ape or gorilla, or is it some sort of relic human? You know, a lot of the sketches you see from witnesses, it looks like an ape. Other ones look like they're human. But, you know, humans don't all look alike either. You know, Aborigines don't look like Eskimos, and Europeans don't look like people from Africa. So I don't know, you know, until we get a body and really look at it, and I'm not advocating we go out and kill one of these creatures, but I don't know, I can't say what they are.
What is your opinion on using known primates as a reference point for Sasquatch?
I love doing that. That's my favorite part of what we do in Project Zoo Book. I've learned more about other primates than I ever thought I would in my entire life. I think it's very important because, again, whether they would be more like an orangutan, that's kind of who we use most of the time to compare, or a human, or somewhere in between. Learning about what they do and what they could eat if they lived here, and what they might act like if they lived here, I think just helps us to try to figure out this mystery. But interestingly, we do talk about that quite a bit, and we have primatologists and primate zoologists in our group that have a lot of knowledge. But what we more focus on are black bear, because we don't have, that we know of, any other kind of primate in North America, but a black bear would be a good stand-in for that, where they are a large apex predator, you know, and they can survive here. They can eat. Where do they hide, you know, or just go to sleep or whatever? And we talk about primates a whole lot, and what could they do, what would they do? But I'd say we talk about black bear even more, because it just kind of makes sense that that's who you're comparing these creatures to in a way.
We're all primates. The lowland gorilla, the silverback gorilla, the chimpanzee, the orangutan, the humans, we're all primates. Like John Green once said, the only similarity between humans and Sasquatch is the fact that they walk upright on two legs. Other than that, the thing's a primate because it's got apparently it has opposing thumbs, has two hands, it has 2 feet, and it just pretty much motivates, walks around in the forest the way people do. You would have to be getting into the DNA and into the scientific studies of DNA to tell how much of a similarity there is between chimpanzees and Sasquatch, or humans and Sasquatch and all that. And the only problem is, we don't have a Sasquatch that we can compare the DNA to as compared to humans. You have to have, unfortunately, a specimen lying on a slab that you can dissect to see what is and what is not similar to human DNA. The fact that we all walk upright on 2 legs is, like John Green said, about the only similarity that we know of right now that says Sasquatch is similar to human as far as DNA is concerned.
Known primates as a reference point, I think, is reasonable. That's a great place to start, in part because what we're looking at, in all probability, is an omnivore, an opportunistic eater, which I think Sasquatch definitely would have to be, given what their needs would be as far as calorie intake and so forth.
I think it's helpful because it certainly seems that primate behavior, there's a lot in common with the Sasquatch behavior. So, I mean, and we're primates as well, but you know, so much of the movements are similar, the nervous habits, it does seem like there's a pretty good similarity to it. So I think it's useful to use it, and I don't think gorillas behave like Sasquatches. I don't think humans behave like Sasquatches, but there are similar characteristics that I think are important and useful to, you know, cross-reference.
I think it's interesting, for instance, when we're looking at Bigfoot numbers and speculating about how many that there may or may not be. A lot of times we will compare other primates for, say, gorillas. At one point, gorillas got down to 200 and something, and you know, we found out that even though he had a low population, that they didn't pass on a recessive gene, so they didn't have any weird things like 6 toes or 6 arms or whatever it happens to be, and that 200 and something was enough for them to still increase and multiply and the species get larger to where it is now. So a lot of times we'll look at those type of things to compare. We speculate that, you know, Bigfoot would be something that wouldn't reproduce all the time. It would reproduce maybe every few years like the other great apes. You know, it would probably, we use to speculate the age of Bigfoot would be probably maybe around 50 years old, which would be what we'd expect to see out of the other great apes.
I think there's a lot of coalition between the activities of the known primates, a lot of similarities between the known primates and the Sasquatches. Even their actions, their movements, their mannerisms, their movements, things like that, there's the correlation.
So I would say that if Sasquatch exists, it is probably a primate, it's probably a great ape. And when you learn evolution in school, you see that Darwin chart of, you know, a monkey to a man. It's not really how evolution works. Evolution's this tangled mess of false starts and dead ends and things. So my personal opinion is if Sasquatch exists, then it is some ancient great ape, or it shares a common ancestor with our common ancestors, or, you know, with our ancestors. So being bipedal, vaguely human-shaped, you know, probably in the evolutionary line there was an offshoot, and that's what we're seeing today. Whether it was Paranthropus or Gigantopithecus, sharing an ancestry with one of those. But my opinion is that it is at least it generated from an ancient great ape.
I would say you could use primates, known primates, gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans, but also could look at Native Americans, because I think maybe they have a lot to do with sometimes the way they look. Some sketches I've seen look very much like Native Americans, and but yet they have the primate actions. Well, the way they possibly build nests, or sneak around the trees, hang from the trees, break the branches, communication, their vocals, a lot of that is very much like primates, and that's, you know, that's kind of my belief. I know people are out there on other things, but that's where I go, between the primates and Native Americans.
My son Bob, my nephew Randy, my brother Dick, and myself the kids told us about, they seen a footprint. They wanted to show it to us. So they took us down to an area to show us this footprint. Well, we seen a footprint. They only seen one though, didn't see any more. So we walked on down the road to the canal, to the footbridge. We were standing on the footbridge. And it sounded like somebody picked up a huge tree and slammed it on the ground and just kept beating it and beating it. So, as we were standing there, this was across the canal from us a little ways, and we kept hearing this just god-awful beating noise, like tearing a tree apart. So we decided to walk off the footbridge slowly and start walking home. And we walked up towards home. We got to an area where the two boys told my brother and I, there's caves over here. I said, oh, come on. He goes, no, there is. So we went up into an area. They've been filling this area in for years, that one area there. So I went up there and there was a big concrete block there and there's a hole and you could climb down in it. So I said, well, I'm gonna look down in there. So I got my cigarette lighter and I started down in there and lit it, and a big rock dropped right beside where I was kneeled down. I backed out and I said, come on you guys, knock that stuff off. And we didn't do it. I said, what? We didn't do it. So the four of us are standing there and then another rock hits. And then another one. So we decided to walk away. We went to the main road there and started up towards my dad's house. The whole time we were walking, rocks were falling right beside us. Never hit us, but fell right beside us. And we looked around, there's no place you could hide. And if you threw a rock from a distance, it would hit and roll. These didn't. These were like they were falling straight out of the sky. So it did that all the way up to my dad's house and down the driveway before it stopped. And it was just like, I don't want to come down here no more. You know, I don't understand. This thing has migrated through this area for years. And I was on these ponds at nighttime in the winter, ice skating, never seen footprints in the snow. But between June, July, August, maybe early September, depending on how hot it is, we've had experiences with whatever's down here. So, you know, that's pretty much my story.
One of the most compelling observations of a Sasquatch taking sustenance is also one of the oldest. From the files of John Green comes the account of William Rowe, whose written testimony was accompanied by a sworn statutory declaration obtained from the city of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. It tells of Rowe's day hike up to an abandoned mine on Mica Mountain, British Columbia, in October of 1955. At a distance of 20 feet, Rowe watched as a 6-foot-tall, 300-pound female Sasquatch ate vegetation from the surrounding bushes. According to Rowe, it pulled the branches toward it and stripped the leaves with its teeth. Its lips curled flexibly around the leaves as it ate. The encounter ended when the creature noticed Rowe, leaving the area with a strange cry he described as half laugh, half language. In a detail often overlooked from Rowe's report, the outdoorsman claims to have found and examined 5 examples of the figure's scat, and seeing no animal hair or insect shells, concluded that the living being he watched that day ate a vegetarian diet. While William Rowe's sighting is more well attested than most, it's far from the final word on the dietary patterns of mystery primates. Other anecdotal evidence does much to suggest an omnivorous existence for Sasquatch, leading one to consider what Ohio's flora and fauna might be able to provide it when driven by hunger.
Do you have any anecdotes or data that suggests that Sasquatch prefers one type of food over another?
No, I don't have any preference stories. I think if they have a preference, the preference for a Sasquatch would be what's ever easiest to obtain at the given moment. I say that because the reports that we do have suggest that they are omnivorous and that they will eat vegetation if that's what's available to them. Matt Pruitt does an excellent job in his most recent work, The Phenomenal Sasquatch, in compiling all the data on diet that is out there and just condensing it down in order to say that it's such a wide range that is available to a creature like a Sasquatch that it really is hard to say what they would prefer, except whatever is closest at hand at a given moment.
I absolutely think if they can catch it, they will eat it. If it's a squirrel or a frog or fish or picking berries or grabbing a deer, I think they're just almost like humans with what we will eat.
I think they're going to go with whatever's easier for them. No different than a bear. They're in the wild. They're going to find the easiest food source that's available for them.
In terms of Ohio, they have to love deer. I mean, we have so many deer. It's in the past 3 years, we've broken records in Ohio for how many deer have been harvested. And I've even had friends come up from, different states in the South, and they're just amazed. Like, oh my gosh, how many deer you guys have. So, I mean, the fact that we don't have any other, apex predators, there's been rumors that we have big cats here, but nothing official, and, we don't have wild hogs, and, it's just the Sasquatch have as much deer as they possibly want. So maybe that is part of it, that they're here so much, because it's easy pickings. So, there's so many reports, too, of them, going after deer.
What about stealing of livestock?
Oh, yeah. I've heard that. I've heard chickens in both hands. Yeah, there's sheep sometimes. It's unfortunate when the farm dogs go after them, because it doesn't always go well if the dog doesn't back off. But mostly the chickens. That's, but that's, it's a hard thing to qualify, because unless you have a witness that actually sees them taking the chickens, there's a million other things that could take the chickens. But I have talked to witnesses that have seen them actually taking chickens.
Oh yeah, there's been once actually on the one side I was telling you about. There was actually a deer kill there that I guarantee. There's no other explanation for it whatsoever. The deer actually, when I say they were pulled apart, it was pulled apart, and it wasn't like if you ever see a bear, when they actually rip open. This wasn't like that. This literally, like the neck it was spun and broken, and then the rear legs were snapped on it. But it was weird. Like, I don't want to get too graphic, but the internal organs were actually still left there, except for there was no liver, which I thought was kind of weird, and we never found where the heart had been. We never found where that went. Those two things were gone, but the rest of it was still there in a pile, and nothing had touched it. Like, not coyotes, nothing. There's a front. There'd have been like the left side hind quarter that was completely missing. So I've seen that, and like I said, I've seen the frogs and fish, and the fish looked like something had eaten. The frogs actually didn't. I don't know if it was maybe you just didn't prefer them that day. I don't know, but that's why I know they eat that. And like I said, there's just a lot of foliage around in general. Like I said, the one area, well, not the one, there's a bunch, but the one area has a lot of like blueberries and raspberries that, you know, that's happen in August and September and stuff. So I figure just like any primate, they do that, you know.
Well, I always find it funny when people say I'm going to go and bait a bait station and they use oranges and bananas. And I would always sit there and say, well, why are you orange bananas? They go, especially bananas. Well, monkey likes banana. And I will respond, why would they eat a banana? How would they know what a banana is? So I think that they're opportunists and they're used to what the food sources are here in Ohio, and I'll speak only about Ohio. Apples, corn, you know, anything, pears that we have, and the natural plants that are able to sustain them.
You know, of course, most of the time when we look at Bigfoot, we see an overlap with the black bear and the Bigfoot habitat. And so a lot of times we'd think that they were coexisting, but then some studies that came out that found that, you know, bears were really only eating about 3% meat. So they were much more herbivores than what we once believed. So they weren't always competing. And of course, in northern climates, the bears were hibernating, so they weren't competing with Bigfoot then. I mean, I think that Bigfoot's opportunistic. He's getting food wherever they can find it, and they are very resourceful. And we know they're resourceful because we're looking at the different reports that come in. You know, we're in parks, they're raiding dumpsters, they're in trash cans. We hear that all the time. They get roadkill. They take advantage of farmers' animals. You know, obviously anything beyond that they have to hunt. And that can be, you know, an issue and sometimes the year.
I know a lot of people think that deer is one of their main food sources. And that could very well be, but I think they're diverse in what they decide to eat. I mean, like I said, they follow the food source. And in many areas that they're known to be, or assumed to be, I guess you'd say, not really known to be, but assumed to be, there's all different kinds, whether it's deer, fish. I think, now to me, I think they would most likely choose fish and edibles and insects more than deer. I mean, deer, because deer's a hard target, you know, for them to chase it down. I think it'd be easier to get, a little easier, put less work in it to get more reward, you know what I mean? And I've been doing a little bit of studying here lately. I'm not really concrete on what I've been reading, but it seems like insects and grubs and stuff like that can actually hold a good bit of protein and stuff for these creatures. In some insects and stuff, pound for pound, it has more protein and calories than what beef does. So why not, you know, go that route? You know, even though they're supposedly a large animal, there's enough there to sustain them, I believe.
In my personal opinion, if Bigfoot exists, it's probably a large omnivore. So it's eating plant life, it's eating fish, it's eating crawdads, it's eating, you know, like I said, it's raiding eggs. And I'm always skeptical about them running down deer. There's kind of an economy in nature. Things don't spend more calories than whatever they're chasing is going to give them, you know. So the deer can run really fast. They evolved to run from wolves and mountain lions and things. The idea of something running down a deer, I've never liked that. But take a drive on the interstate and just count how many roadkill deer there are along the interstate. I would say there's probably a fair amount of like fresh scavenging that happens if this animal exists. I mean, you're spending no calories dragging a deer that got hit on the highway off and eating it at your leisure in the woods, you know. So I would imagine there's even a fair amount of scavenging.
My name's Bob. I'm a professional truck driver, and this is my experience. I grew up over here. My grandfather lived over here, and me, my brothers, and my cousins all grew up with the stories of the grass man. And to be honest with you, I always thought it was just our parents. Be careful, don't let the grass man, you know, basically try to keep us out of trouble. Didn't work. But me and my cousin Randy spent a ton of time down here. My uncle Dick, Randy's dad, was a Vietnam vet, and he taught us how to build lean-tos and things like that. So we'd come down there and spend weekends camping, fishing, just doing typical kid stuff, you know, playing capture the flag more or less. And you know, certain things would happen down here we wouldn't attribute to the grassman until later on. Like one night we were in our lean-to and we heard, it sounded like small trees being snapped. And honestly, we never tried to react to it because we always thought it was our dads trying to scare us. And we didn't want to tuck tail and run if it's just dads. Nothing other than that happened to us while we were down here fishing. A couple times rocks would go over our head into the canal here. Again, we tried not to react to it until the one day me and my cousin Randy were walking over by the landfill there and we found a footprint. And we're sitting there thinking, you know, there's no way this could be the dad's. I mean, this footprint was a good 12 to 15 inches, probably 4 inches deep. So we went back and got my Uncle Dick, and he came and looked at it, and he just got this look of, excuse the language, maybe an moment for him. So he's like, you guys be careful, let's just go home. He had called my dad, and that night, or that evening after my dad got off work, he came over to my grandfather's house and we took him down and showed him the footprint. Then we just kind of walked around down here, got to the footbridge. And like my dad had said earlier, you know, it sounded like trees being ripped up and snapped. And the sound was such a loud crack that every time it went off, all four of us would literally jump. You know, even though we know it's coming, we're still jumping. So we started to walk back, and that's when we had showed, you know, the cave area, and my dad had told that story. So I think I may have like the timeline mixed up, but there was one point where my dad and my Uncle Dick said we're going to go down the canal tonight. Well, we had my younger brother with us, and so there was 3 kids and 3 adults. My Uncle Henry was with us as well. So we started out down there and we decided to split up. Well, me and Randy looked at each other and basically said, this is where it's going to happen. This is where they're going to try to put the fear of God in us. They're going to make us, you know, because nothing has happened to where we've seen anything yet. So we decided to split up. And for some strange reason, me and my brother Danny was with my Uncle Dick and Randy was with my dad. And we kind of split up at where the fork in the road was at down here. And couldn't have been more than 5 minutes. We heard my dad and Randy screaming, guys, guys, guys. We come running back. Well, Randy's telling me, I seen it, it was this tall, which I knew at that point it was a joke being played. So we're sitting there, and then my dad and Uncle Dick, and all of a sudden my Uncle Henry is missing. We can't find him. So we're sitting there and kind of plotting our next move, and we heard there was a neighbor of my grandfather's that had a dog that used to follow us down here. I mean, all you had to do was say we're going fishing, and he'd tear off down through here. So we're down here, and we're squatted down off the road in the weeds, and we hear the dog yelping and playing around, coming through the weeds, and we heard something bigger coming through the weeds. And just as this dog broke the weeds into the road, this big, long arm swatted the hind quarter of this dog. The dog spun around 2 or 3 times in midair, landed, and just beat fist all the way home. I mean, it was gone. The dog would not come back down there after that. So my dad and my uncle are looking at each other, and they had this look of fear in their eyes. And I don't want to say they were afraid for them. I think they were afraid for us. So we come up with this plan that the kids are gonna stay at the fork in the road, because if you look straight, you can see the lights from my grandfather's house, probably a quarter mile down the road, and they were gonna go try to find Henry. So either me or my cousin came up with this brilliant idea that we'd stand back to back at the fork in the road. And we picked up, the road was lined with those big white rocks, like construction rocks, and we each grabbed a handful of rocks. Well, I was facing toward the road up here. Randy was facing the house, and my cousin Randy was facing toward the footbridge. So we're standing there and we hear something. I don't want to say it was a walk, more like 2 steps than nothing. And we're kind of like waiting for one of our dads to come out of the woods, and instead, crossing the path of my cousin and my brother, their point of view, this thing came across the road. Now the road was probably 8 to 12 foot wide. It was like a service road. This thing took 1 step and was in the middle of the road and just stood there, turned its head to look at us. My brother literally dropped his rocks, and me and Randy started firing rocks at this thing. Probably the stupidest, most epic, idiotic thing we could have done. But with the moonlight, we could see the rocks hit this thing, bounce off. And all it did was step off the road into the weeds, and then the most horrific, gut-curdling growl came from that area. And we just, at that point, we were gone. We ran to the main road. We're screaming for our dads. Finally, my dad found us because he thought we'd run to the house. Well, that thing was moving toward the house, so we're going the opposite direction. And my dad comes out and, just walk the main road back to your grandfather's house. We're going to find Henry. So we get back to my grandfather's and we're screaming as we're running down the street. He comes out. We kind of tell him what's going on, but you got 3 panicked kids and my dad and my uncle come back. And at this point, they don't know where Henry is. So they grab a 12 gauge and they go back. And then probably 40 minutes later, they come home. And my dad's shirt is ripped, his chest is all red. And he said he was kind of shoved out of the way. Never got the actual full-blown story of it. But it just, from that moment on, we knew that at that night, I was scared to death, I ain't gonna lie. I mean, I was petrified. But after it was over, and you start to process it and think about it, it was exciting. You want it again. And for the longest time, I would come down here by myself. I mean, I had a moped. I'd ride the trails on my moped. And there'd be times where nothing at all would happen. And then there'd be times when everything was dead. Like no crickets, no birds, no nothing. And that's when you start to feel like you're not alone. Like something is watching you.
I'm Jamie King, and I've known Tina for a while, and Tina originally contacted us after her incident, and my wife Jenny.
Hello, I'm Jenny King, and I've known Tina for quite a while. Of course, I've known Jamie even longer, and of course we know Aunt Jerry here, she's wonderful. And Jamie and I got into Bigfooting years ago when we had our first experience at the Shenango.
And I'm Tina Sams from Liberty, Ohio, and
Jerry Pasternak, and I am Tina's aunt. And I actually got involved after I went to my first town hall that Tina took me to. When you hear these grown adult hunters giving you these stories, at that moment, I knew that there was something out there, just didn't know what it was.
I would originally think that this would not be a good habitat. Like, I mean, honestly, you think of Bigfoot, you don't think of Ohio, you don't think of Pennsylvania. You think of like the West Coast, the Pacific Northwest, Canada. And, like after my encounter and after hearing Tina's encounter and interviewing people over the years, you realize that this is a really rich area for Bigfoot activity. And I think that because you have all these lakes and you have small communities, and these small communities have more people that are seeing this thing. And they're seeing it both on a physical and I would consider spiritual level after interviewing people. So for me, there's this physical, spiritual element that I can't dismiss.
That's kind of where I'm at with it, where definitely Bigfoot Sasquatch is physical, but also to me, it's also spiritual and interdimensional. So when people talk about a habitat for them, I think that why they kind of go to wooded areas is they are more concealed and not seen. But do I think they can just go into another dimension and pop up somewhere else? Absolutely. So I don't know if they're actually sleeping, eating, mating, having their young in these locations. Maybe, maybe not, because I do believe that they're not always here, not always physically here.
You know, I'm in a group called Project Zoo Book, and Project Zoo Book was started by a meeting with some primatologists from a very big zoo in this area. And it has morphed over the last 5 years into these, every other week we do these Thursday calls with all these scientists and anthropologists and law enforcement, and just it's a great group of people. But something that I realized pretty much on these calls is not that it's contradictory to if it can come or go, I don't know that, but a lot of the behaviors that people describe are primate behaviors. And actually a couple of the people that work in the primate department at these zoos got interested because I think one of them, their dad drug them to a Bigfoot museum, and as they were reading the reports about the swaying and people call it smiling or grimacing, and how those are all known primate behaviors, not maybe it could, that absolutely. And like the swaying, that's a nervous action for chimps or gorillas. The grimacing, when they show their teeth, that could be mistaken for a smile. That's actually them showing stress, and it's kind of a sign of anger. So to me, those reports, which there's a lot of reports of the swaying and those are primate behaviors. But like I said before, these two as an example, they're dear friends of mine. I would trust them with my kid's life. I believe them when they tell me that they're experiencing things. Just because maybe I didn't have the same experience or you didn't have the same experience, it's still an experience, it's a personal experience, but who are we to say who's right or wrong? And that's really how I feel about it. And I know something that all three of us do separately is I definitely set intentions when I'm going into the woods or going on a hike. You could call it researching Bigfoot. I just call it hiking. I think you guys just call it hiking. They're more in depth. They have micro studies and stuff, but I do set intentions, I guess, which would be a spiritual thing where in my mind, sometimes out loud, where I say I'm coming in, I mean no harm, I don't want to scare you, I don't want you to scare me if you're here, and I just try to set some type of intentions where, so I guess that would make it spiritual too, because I've always done that. And I'm not closed off to the fact that it's something else, like I said. And just because I'm in Project Zoo Book, a lot of people won't even discuss anything but it being an undiscovered primate. They don't want to hear nothing. If you tell them stories about, they're just shut off to it. And, science changes, not because science is wrong, but because of new discoveries. So something that might have been set in stone 30 years ago with technology now proven. So, I think I'm kind of in the middle of that.
With well over 11.5 million people living in Ohio, it's inevitable that animals learn to find unused or wasted food wherever humans dwell. If that's true of rodents, raccoons, and the occasional bear, what would that mean for a normally reclusive great ape? Would it too become an opportunistic scavenger? If so, would its brain capacity enable it to be more stealthy than the average garbage-raiding critter? Or would its proximity to the makers of said waste leave it more vulnerable?
Do you have any data or hear any stories that suggest that Sasquatch prefers one type of food over another, or what does it prefer to eat?
Well, it's my belief that they're omnivorous. I've taken reports of them raiding gardens, stripping fruit trees, apple trees overnight. They will eat meat. There have been reports of deer hunters losing their game, to a Sasquatch. I've heard of them dumpster diving. They'll eat whatever they want to eat, and if it's something they don't particularly care for, I guess they won't eat it. But I think they'll eat just about anything. Yes, I have not only in my own books, but I've read several instances where they have walked off with a pig, or they've taken a calf. Supposedly they'll open up refrigerators, you know, if you would have one on the porch, and take food out of there, and you know, they'll eat, you know, whatever they want. Very opportunistic.
There's been a couple stories I've heard where people were actually, I mean, I can't say they were foraging for berries, but people have noticed them for some reason when there's berry patches and they've been out, and they've been in berry patches, you know, people have ran into them. So I would assume that they're probably doing the same thing.
How about stories of them digging through trash?
Yeah, I've heard that too. There was one, I can't remember the town, it's down in the southern part of West Virginia. A guy actually seen one digging through a dumpster in the residential area, and that's been reported in several states.
Again, I think that it depends on where you are. You hear stories, you know, all across North America of them being seen carrying a dead deer. In Ohio, they would have to be omnivorous, I would think, because they can't, it would be very difficult for them, I think, to survive. Although, again, black bear do, so, you know, depending what they eat, one of my fascinations is, and it brought me to this, my Bigfoot journey brought me to becoming an Ohio certified volunteer naturalist, and to do different bushcraft classes and to continue that education, because for those reasons, one, to protect myself in the forest if I get lost or something, but also to try to figure out what is not Bigfoot, but what they could be doing. I feel like they would have to be, maybe not have to be, but they probably are omnivorous, because you hear reports of them eating berries, of them carrying a deer, and why else would they be doing that? I've never taken a report myself of them eating meat, but I've taken reports of them eating shellfish. I've taken reports of them being in the river trying to catch fish, all kinds of plants, but I think animals are way more smart than we give them credit for. There was just that segment in the news last week, I think, where the orangutan was healing itself with like a poultice made out of leaves. Like, yeah, healing itself. So they're smart. They're very smart. A lot of people say, well, these aren't great apes. They have to be more human. But I'm like, great apes are pretty darn smart. So I think that they would take advantage of anything that could be found. And there's a lot more food available in Ohio than people think. You go in the ditch right up the road here, or in that field behind me, you're going to find all kinds of things that you can eat if you know what to look for, and animals know what to look for.
Have you taken any reports of Bigfoot like going through trash?
I have. Yeah, that one in Montana. The lady, she was the owner of a small little grocery store, and she said there was one right in her dumpster the day before. You hear about those stories like at Salt Fork State Park. I've never taken a story from there with that, but I hear about those stories all the time. But I have taken some rural areas in Ohio where people said that they were inside their trash cans, which makes sense, scavenging.
The closest thing I could come to in relation to that would possibly be down near St. Clairsville in 1987. There was a report of a sighting in August of '87 by a boy who lived across the road off of State Route 9, lived across the road from State Route 9, where across the road in this wide open field, there were 7 bales of hay, the round bales, that had been tipped over from laying on their flat side and tipped over onto the round side. And the suspicion is that the thing, if it was a Bigfoot that did it, and they weigh half a ton or more, that it was possibly looking for ground moles or mice or whatever underneath the bales of hay, looking for food under there. But I don't really know of any reports like that.
Yeah, there are stories that have a lot to do in scavenging fashion of Bigfoot. Again, going back to Politis's work on the Hoopa Project and that reservation, there's stories of very direct, close-range sightings of Bigfoot not only rooting through trash, but carrying bags of it off into the woods, ostensibly for greater exploration of what's in the bags. And it's not clear in those cases what exactly Bigfoot was rooting for. It could have been food. There's food scraps certainly that factor into other cases. But that is a phenomenal report, in my opinion, to have that detail of the sighting, that close proximity, to see it taking the bags away. And unfortunately, in that case, police were called to the scene and arrived just after the figure had disappeared. But that seemed to be a pretty well-documented case. Other ones in which food factors in this regard were given to Doug Waller. He reports them in his book, Hidden Encounters, and it's in cases where families, take whatever human food waste is left over and just take it out back and dump it. There's one case in particular in a community just east of Zanesville, Ohio, and somewhat close to Doug's house, evidently, where that was their standard practice. They would just take stuff out, scrape the plates out outside and leave the scraps there. One winter, ground cover with snow in the Zanesville area is not unheard of, but it's fairly unusual. And in this case, what they discovered after a snowfall was huge tracks all around their house, going to the places where they left food, going to places where their cat food was kept in a bin. It was broken into and some food was consumed. And the same family, the Hopkins family, as they're named in the book, also reported that they had been keeping chickens until they were all killed without any obvious puncture or bite marks, and some were taken from their coop. So I think that's also part of the opportunistic angle on all of this, is that in these sort of rural communities, there is a very high chance that Bigfoot will opportunistically go after the food that's there and chase people away from places that have been historically good for them, ripe with whatever it is they're after. There's one case in which evidently two sort of juvenile-sized Sasquatch act really crazy around this fisherman in the Wills Creek area of southeast Ohio, and he was fishing near a spillway, and he got the sense that he was on their turf. And that's why they were acting out the way they were, was to usher him out, because that was their spot for fish, and he was occupying it at the time.
I do. The one is more of a, like, I can't prove it, but like there was a alpaca farm that they never went public with it, but there's neighbors who've talked about it. And I think this farm accidentally was feeding them, because what they would do is anytime one of the animals would pass on, apparently you have to call in a vet, they have to check on it, that you got to get all this for the insurance, all the information. But then after it's all done, they weren't actually burying them or burning them, they were taking them in a back, like of their property way in the back, and they were just leaving them for the coyotes and scavengers. Well, I think that kind of backfired, because this same place, like, they wound up missing, like occasionally, like an alpaca would just go completely missing, and it's not like a area that they should go missing in. There's too many neighbors, you'd think you'd find one, but they never find it, and it's for a while it was like one every other year kind of thing. And like, so I had to, we were asking questions, neighbors and things, and some of the neighbors reluctantly talked about seeing things, or hearing things mostly, but the one said he saw something in that same area walking around in the back, but he assumed it was just a person, which it could have been, but, well, yeah, that, like I said, I've had the reports about it going through dumpsters, and there was actually a report out in West Salem that actually was in the newspaper where a lady was working out at a gym, and like where she worked there, and she came out to throw garbage away, and there was another one in a dumpster there too. And she said as soon as it saw her, it like booked off and took off into the woods. But like I guess that was later in the evening. This was the end of the night while they're throwing out the garbage. But that's the second time I've seen that. As for like seeing one rooting through, like picking, foraging, I haven't seen anything with that. But there's areas where you see possible evidence, but you can't really state it unless you see it. So.
I know that in some places where there's a lot of agriculture, there'll be silage areas where, there all the different grains and leftovers and whatnot are stored under these big tarps. And these tarps run sometimes for, hundreds of yards. And, there's reports of there being handprints and rips and some of the fabric of those that people have been looking at. I think that a lot of us believe that in general, they're pretty respectful of farms. I'm not sure whether the belief would be that they're intelligent enough that they have learned that they don't want to attract attention to themselves. But we do have a lot of reports of, pigs, things like that, maybe sheep missing a little bit, calves, but not a lot, not like you would expect to see. The trash we see all the time. I mean, the Bossburg incident in Bossburg, Washington, the Bigfoot was crippled apparently, and the cast became known as Cripplefoot. It's probably the most common example of a Bigfoot raiding trash cans, or, that was a landfill dump that it was in. So we see that commonly, and I think that that's one of the most common things that a lot of us are looking at now, is if there's some type of trash can in that area. I know there's a local park that I took a number of reports out of that area that I found that they were going in there after dark all the time because, humans were going to the shooting range or whatever it happens to be, and we're dragging our McDonald's sacks and whatever fast food we're eating that day in our pizza boxes, and we're throwing it all in there, and then at night everybody clears out. And interestingly, a lot of times I've found that if there's enough room around shooting ranges, that they'll tend to stay in that general area because humans don't like to go in the woods around the shooting areas. So if there's a couple miles behind a shooting range, then a lot of times we'll see something like that.
In 2007, we recorded the East Central Ohio chatter, and we set up near a dumpster after the Boy Scouts pulled out, and we recorded something very similar to what Ron Moorhead captured in the 70s and 3,000 miles away. In fact, that's included in his book, Voices of the Wilderness. The only other one that says Ohio is my team, and that happened in April 2007. And we specifically targeted the dumpsters.
And that's because you believe they're opportunistic.
Sure, and this was in mid-April, so if they didn't have a food source, why not go for what's easiest and be able to use it?
Have you heard any reports of them stealing like livestock?
I've heard it in killing livestock. There's been reports through Ohio through the time. Chickens are an easy target that they've used. Sometimes animals will just disappear. They have lambs and calves and stuff like that, so they disappear. They're not nearly as prevalent what I've seen throughout the years, but it does happen on occasion.
I have heard that, and there's certain investigators that mark the days in the parks when the trash is picked up. So, they've got, some hits on those kind of situations.
How about foraging for berries or feeding off of crops or anything like that?
I personally haven't taken any reports about that. I've heard of apple trees that are kind of harvested from very high areas on maybe just one side of the tree. And it's hard with the berries because, during berry picking season, if you're gone from those berries for an hour, the deer get them, and you're like, oh, I just missed it, so it's hard to tell what's eating the berries.
When I was young, this whole area here was all woods, and it had 3 service roads in there where they had pumps for pumping water out from underneath the ground to go into the pump station, which I had lived next to, and then they'd pump it over to Firestone to cool down the machinery. And like I say, it was all woods. We'd come down here and go fishing. You could walk down these service roads, and even in the daytime, it was almost dark. That's how wooded this area was. And then, for some reason, somebody got the bright idea, hey, let's flood the whole area and keep everybody out of here. And I know the reason for it. There's a lot of people that know what happened down here, and this was all done on purpose. I don't know if the government did it, the park system did, well, park system is the government behind all this, and they're going to they tried to keep as many people out of this area. You can't come down here after dark. It's illegal to be down here because it's a park system. So you can't be here after dark. And like I said, this whole area flooded, and it was flooded on purpose. And it was a beautiful area, a natural area. They had gardens down here. It was just a great place. And they flooded it all out, and they did it on purpose. And they're still pouring water in here today, or else this water wouldn't be here.
How does that make you guys feel as far as just like being taxpayers, American citizens?
It's sickening.
What pisses me off, because they took a natural area, and if there was a danger, okay, why don't you tell people what the danger is and do something about it, or leave it the way it was and quit lying to people.
Yeah, it ain't like nobody ever got hurt. You know what I mean?
Nobody's ever
been attacked or anything like that, so let it be.
The people ought to be mad about it. I mean, you know, but I guess this society doesn't really care. I bet if you got a hold of a lot of older people that lived in this area, you'd probably hear a lot more stories. But, yeah, I guess it is what it is now. But, you know, it's just disappointing to me, and I really, yeah, this first time I've been down here in years, and I probably won't ever come down here again, you know, so it's just really upsetting that everything goes this way.
Okay, to put it out, back then, early 80s, Bigfoot was like something you see on TV, you know what I mean? The belief wasn't there, and if you reported it, chances are getting looked at like you're a loony bin. Now things have changed, but I will always have that experience that me and my dad saw this thing together. I mean, that's the only visual sighting I've had. I mean, I've had what I could call was, but never seen it. You know, like I was out on a run in Indiana, and some things happened that made me come right back to this moment, you know, and never seen anything, but, you know, it always leads back. And it was me, my dad, my brother, my cousin, and my uncle. And that's something, you know, my brother won't come down here. You know, he never came to my grandfather's house after that. If Grandpa wanted to see him, he had to come to our house. It messed with my brother that much.
Whatever a Sasquatch might want to eat, the state of Ohio would seem to have it in abundance, from berries, nuts, and all manner of foliage to an ample deer population, fish from a 29,000-mile river system, plentiful livestock, and leftover scraps wherever human beings call home. The caloric need of such a creature would likely be great, but not overwhelmingly so, when taking into account that a human adult requires 2,000 to 3,000 calories a day, and a lowland gorilla needs around 4,000, the projected intake of a Bigfoot would seem achievable, given the resources at hand, especially if they happen to be consuming our leftovers. It's a pragmatic thought, intriguing in its simplicity. If Bigfoot is real, then it really has to eat. And perhaps a key to verifying its existence will be linked to this elemental need. Where things get uncomfortable is in the adjoining question. If Bigfoot is real, wouldn't it be the apex predator of the North American woods and the third of the Buckeye State that's forested? And if so, where does that leave us?